All right, so you should be able to see my screen. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I was invited to talk a bit about bike priority at roundabouts, which is handy because that's something that I've been my colleagues have been working on and studying a fair bit over the past year. So what I would take the opportunity to do today is basically start with what we were looking at, some potential solutions we looked at over the past year, and how we're continuing to develop them for Ontario, and how that's going. So, I work for Mobi Con, which is a Dutch transportation planning firm, but I work in Ottawa, which is our Canadian headquarters. So, if you're wondering why we're looking at Dutch roundabout design, it's because we're a Dutch company and that's what we do, among other things as well as typical Canadian planning as well. So the we're working with a couple clients here in Ontario to improve roundabouts, and there's two main areas that they're looking to improve. Improve the roundabouts they have. And we're focusing on single lane roundabouts within the urban area because we think that seems to be the lowest hanging fruit when it comes to these types of improvements. And if they're successful there, then maybe we can start looking at other areas. But for the moment, just to keep the scope manageable, we're looking at single lane roundabouts in the urban area. So the two things are they want to improve the safety and comfort for pedestrians and cyclists at the roundabouts. And they want there to be some kind of way for someone to cycle around the roundabout legally, which there currently isn't, other than cycling through the roundabout. So when it comes to safety, of course, we're all pretty familiar with the when it comes to unsignalized crossings, reducing the speed can have a quite a substantial improvement to safety. So in the Dutch roundabout design guidelines, they're very explicit about this. So they say motor traffic speed should not be higher than 35 kilometers an hour. If you calculate that it is, you need to adjust the design. TAC is generally talking along the same line. So they do say it is the entry path radius is the most important because it governs the speed, and that in turns affects the yield rates. So how do Canadian roundabouts do in this assessment? Well, circulating around the circle, generally they do actually achieve that 30 kilometers an hour because it's just a function of the radius of the circle or the diameter. But what we notice is that a lot of the time the entry radii and exit radii are larger, which allows people to be traveling at higher speeds than 30 when they're crossing the crosswalk. And here's a different example of a different design, still in Ontario, but this is a design with much sharper entry and exit radii. And in this case, if the fastest path, the speed of traffic is going to stay below 30, not just in the circle, but also at the crosswalks. So the second thing we're looking at was the ability to legally ride around the roundabout, so not within it, which currently you can't do because you're not allowed to cycle in a pedestrian crossover, a PXO. And that's generally what we put at roundabouts. So the design we were looking at, the Dutch design we were looking at as a comparison is what we would call the protected roundabout, which is, if you think of what a protected intersection is, it's basically an intersection where you've got your setback cycling paths, and you're tightening up the corners. It's basically the same thing, but then for a roundabout, which is quite useful for single lane roadways, intersection of single lane roadways. So often we're talking about collectors and maybe minor arterials. But of course, you can't just copy paste that design to Canada because we have a lot of differences. The biggest one is probably the different vehicle types. So our transport trucks are much larger than the transport trucks in Europe. Of course, we have different weather. In Ontario, we get way more snow accumulation than they do in the Netherlands, and different expectations. We have different driver culture due to all the roads that we've already built with different trends of bike priority. So, can bikes have priority at all? Is sort of the first question. And yes, bikes can have priority in Ontario. There's tons of places where bikes do have priority. You're probably familiar with any cycle track crossing where you're going along a main road, of course, the cycle track also has priority, which is pretty intuitive. It'd be pretty counterintuitive if you were cycling along a road and then suddenly the bike path had to yield to the cars that are turning right. Um, and here's a couple examples in Ottawa of just some cycle tracks with priority where they're crossing cars, which is something that we're pretty accustomed to in Ontario. So can we put a yield sign at a bike path crossing? Well, yield signs can only be placed at the intersections between highways, which of course raises the question, what is a highway? And per the HTA, the highway is anywhere that is not only intended for use by vehicles, but even just places that are used by vehicles. So their list, of course, includes like streets, avenues, and stuff. But they also include squares, places, driveways. So really everything. They're really not. A highway is pretty much any public right of way used by vehicles. And vehicles do include bicycles. So bicycle paths, if they're in their own right of way, are highways. Then their HTA also does have comments on like where exactly you place the a yield sign, and that's relative to roadways, which then raises the question of what is a roadway. And again, it's similar to a highway, but it's just the roadway, a particular piece of I guess asphalt in practice. So a highway may be consisting of multiple roadways. So if you have a road with cycle tracks on the side, that may be a highway that consists of like a main road for vehicles, and then the cycle tracks are themselves also roadways. So it's a highway with three roadways. Um, so based on that interpretation, this is a potential solution we came up with that seems to conform with the HDA that does give priority to cyclists and pedestrians at a roundabout leg. So basically just putting yield signs approaching the crossing and then also a yield sign as you already do have at the roundabout. And this would be instead of the pedestrian crossovers that we currently put there. The reason for that being that you can't cycle in a pedestrian crossover. We also took a look at the geometry. So we made a conceptual design for a roundabout based on a bus, a 12-meter bus, just circulating without using the truck aprons, and then installing truck aprons based on the path of our WB20 transport trucks. And this is what we ended up with. So it looks pretty similar to a Dutch example, but the main difference is the truck aprons are much, much larger because our trucks are much larger. Then the other consideration here is to shape the bike paths. So in the Netherlands, the bike paths are designed to be as intuitive as possible based on the priority rules. So where bikes have priority, it's designed such that the bikes are traveling straight, or at least as straight as you would be going when you're going in a circle around a roundabout. So that means the bike path is a circle. So it seems like it's sort of the through movement, the circulating around the roundabout movement, and then the people exiting the roundabout are doing a right turn. So as an Ontario driver, you're familiar that when you're turning right, you're generally going to have to yield to pedestrians and cyclists anyway. So you want to recreate that sort of situation in the geometric design. One of our clients was not comfortable proceeding, like continuing the development of the bike priority option. So we also made the variant of the non-bike priority option, which is already in OTM Book 18. The only difference is that we added the PXOs that are pretty much always present and that are a lot of municipalities require to be present at roundabouts. But the difference here is that now the bikes are making a left turn before they cross, which again is it creates the intuitive situation where we know when we're turning left in Ontario, we're going to have to yield the through traffic. So that helps make the design intuitive, so make the priority rules consistent with the geometric design. And it's really just the geometric design of the paths because the geometric design of the roundabout itself is the same between the two options. The So looking at the TAC guidelines that we currently have to follow, these designs do pretty much follow them. The only real difference is that we're much stricter about maintaining a low fastest path speed when entering and exiting, whereas the TAC guideline is a little bit more lenient about allowing higher speeds entering and exiting the roundabouts. One of the big concerns we often got was, oh yeah, here's the radii. The radii are within the TAC ranges. One of the biggest um, concerns we get about this design is that the angle of conflict between the entry legs and the circulating roadway are much closer to 90 degrees. So there's concern about if you're going to increase the severity of T-bone collisions because the angle is now closer to 90 degrees rather than the you know very low angles we often have entering a roundabout. And yeah, the design does have a higher angle. Um, so it's closer to about 50 to 60 degrees, which is the upper limit of what TAC recommends. They recommend not going above 60 degrees. And it is below that. But the reason that that's not as really a concern is that because the speeds are also lower, the severity actually ends up being lower, despite the fact that the angle is higher. Um, and yeah, so that's a quick summary of what we've been developing with a few different clients in Ontario. And yeah, in the short term, starting to look at when making new roundabout designs, being a bit more strict with this, making sure that the entry and exit radii are as tight as we can get away with to reduce the speeds at the crosswalks and cross rides. Potentially testing bike priority at one or two locations in Ontario, and in the longer term, uh, if there may be potential to adjust existing roundabouts or adjust other roundabouts to support bike priority, and regardless of bike priority, just reducing the speeds of traffic at the crosswalks and cross rides to improve the comfort and safety of crossing pedestrians and cyclists.
Great. Thanks, Narayan. That was very insightful. Having been to the Netherlands a few times and ridden a bike over there, yeah, it is a bit of a different world, and it's really, really interesting the number of cyclists they have in that country. It's quite incredible. If we'd only get them to wear helmets, it would be great, but that's another whole topic for discussion. A quick question on the matter of a slightly larger roundabout. And I know your focus has been single lane roundabouts, but there are certainly locations where you have two-lane roundabouts and uh, a bike path adjacent to the roadway that needs to get through the intersection. How would you handle that? Or is that a whole different discussion where you have a bicycle um, being interrupted by a potentially double right turn movement onto the adjacent street? Because now you have a sightline issue with the vehicle that is in furthest from the cyclist. If there's a large truck or a bus or something making the turn adjacent to the curb, that blocks the cyclist's view of the vehicle in the adjacent lane, and vice versa. That vehicle in the adjacent lane can't see a cyclist because they're just following the right turner at the curb. So that person may stop. The one in the next lane over probably wouldn't, or wouldn't until the
I
last
would
minute.
see, yeah,
Yeah, it's tricky.
yeah. So yeah, you summarized really well a lot of the reason that we did reduce the scope to only be single lane roundabouts because it does get a lot more complicated very quickly, and basically we wouldn't be able to make any progress if we had included the scope to include the multi-lane roundabouts.
Mhm.
I guess to give the context of what they do in the Netherlands, it's generally in the Netherlands you will not have bike priority at a multi-lane roundabout. In fact, multi-lane roundabouts often generally don't have any crossings at all. They'll have a grade separated crossing or a mid-block crossing somewhere else.
Mhm.
And they're in the places where there are multi-lane bike crossings at roundabouts, they will not have priority. So the bikes will have to yield. And yeah, that's part of the reason they try to avoid putting multi-lane roundabouts in places where you would have bikes crossing at grade.
Mhm. Okay, here's a friendly suggestion. You mentioned you're going to do a trial run or a demonstration project. If you want to set one of those up in the GTA, I would happy to be your guinea pig. and ride through it with frightening regularity. Is if I don't go over the handlebars at least once on a ride that I'm on, it's just not a fun ride. So I'm happy to get out there and torture test whatever you're going to put out in the field and see if it really works.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
I'm going
think
to jump
we're
in.
yeah.
And I'll jump in there as well and just let everyone know that the OTC is working on a pilot for BXOs, so for bicycles crossing at PXOs. We were asked to look at roundabouts, and we've decided that that's going to be a next phase of the process project and the research that we're going to be doing. So I think it's really important work that we'll be looking at there in terms of cyclists who are crossing and having to dismount, or in this case, hoping that we'll be able to have them not dismount. So stay tuned for that as our next phase in terms of this BXO pilot project.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. If anyone has any quick questions for Narayan, we don't want to drag it on too long because the clock is ticking here. But if anyone has a question they'd like to throw out for Narayan that he could answer quickly, that please put your hand up and we'll go from there. I see any. Do you see any at your end, Jeff? Or
Nope.
No?
Nope,
Okay.
I don't see any here.
All right. Good. Well, thanks again, Narayan. That was terrific.